Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's devotions. I trust and pray that you've had a good day today. Tonight, I want to read to you from Psalm 8, and Psalm 8, verse 1 begins: O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babies and infants you have established strength because of your foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look to your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honour. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Well, the main theme of this psalm is the majestic greatness of God's name and the place of man within his creation. Derek Kidner has said of it that this psalm is an unsurpassed example of what a hymn should be, celebrating as it does the glory and grace of God, rehearsing who he is and what he's done, and relating us and our world to him, all with a masterly economy of words and in a spirit of mingled joy and awe. It's not only the first praise song in the Psalms, it's also the only praise psalm that's addressed directly to God, and it begins and ends with the same affirmation of praise for the majesty of the name of the Lord. At first glance, verse 2 seems quite strange with its reference to the praise of babies and infants and the silencing of God's foes. Babies and infants, of course, are vulnerable and totally dependent upon others for food and protective care. And so David is using this image of vulnerability and weakness and dependence to create a dramatic contrast with the presumed power of those who are opposed to God and to God's people. As one scholar writes, he's probably suggesting that God builds strong defences out of human vulnerability and weakness, possibly because we have to then, in recognition of our own weakness, we have to depend on God, because it's a recognition of our own weakness. That's the starting point for recognising our need to depend on the strength of God. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul wrote about his thorn in the flesh and how he prayed that God would release him from it, that God would take it away. But God refused to do that, and God said to him, "No, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." The majestic gloriousness of God's name is such that Jews, even to this day, neither speak nor write the name of God properly, for it is too holy to be named. As Alec Motyer notes, the reference to the name of the Lord here is not so much a reference to God in his divine reality, but rather it's a relational phrase. It refers to God as he has made himself known to his people, who are in turn to bear that revelation of the name of God to the world. God's name is majestic and holy and glorious because it reveals his majestic and holy character. In telling God about God, David reveals that God is Yahweh, the name that's used here. He's the God of the Exodus. He is our deliverer and redeemer. David tells God and us that God is sovereign, not in a passive way, like as if he was made everything and rules over it from some distance, watching it all unfold, but he is actively sovereign over all that he has made. He's involved in his creation, over all its aspects and all its activities. He's the God who is truly God. He is the one and only God of all the earth, not according to our notions of who he is or what he is like, but rather as he reveals himself to be in his name, the great I am, Yahweh. It is no wonder then that the Ten Commandments forbids misusing the name of the Lord, and the commandment comes with a warning of judgment against those who break it. In verse 3, David's focus shifts from the majesty of God's name to the mystery of his unfathomable care for humanity. Whatever the ancient Hebrews wanted to express anything that was too vast to be counted, they tended to use the illustration of the stars in the night sky. You might recall that God invited Abraham to count the stars in the sky and then made the promise that his descendants would be as numerous, as uncountable as the stars. On a clear night, David could probably see no more than 2,000 to 3,000 stars. If he'd had a good pair of binoculars, he might have seen as many as 100,000. If he had access to all our technology today, he would have known that our galaxy is only one of 100 billion such galaxies in the observable universe. If David was awestruck and humbled in the face of such divine majesty, only a few thousand stars, and he was convinced of that, of the insignificance of man in the face of such divine majesty, how much more should we be in awe of that? No wonder David says, "What is man?" The word that he uses for man here is a word that specifically describes man's weakness and frailty. As David gazes in wonder at the majesty of God's creation, he begins to think of man's place in that creation, and his first thought is of man's weakness and frailty and smallness and insignificance. Man is nothing more than a speck of cosmic dust in the grand scheme of the universe that God has made. And yet, the truth on which the remainder of the psalm rests is that in spite of everything that separates humans from their creator, so that humans appear as but specks of cosmic dust, God is still mindful of them. God still cares for them. The two terms that David uses refer to calling something to mind or remembering, and also hunting or seeking something out. The idea seems to be that when God calls to mind the people that he has made, it stirs up in his heart such a longing for them that he must seek them out and lavish his care upon them. David details some of the ways that highlight the paradox of man's insignificance with God's amazing care of him. He says, "You made him." God is the creator. We are the created. This statement sets us in our rightful place, not only in the cosmos, but in relation to God. It tells us that every breath is a gift from God. We could not even do that if it were not for God's grace towards us. He cares for us. He's made us a little lower than the heavenly beings. He's given us a position in creation far beyond that apparent significance. He's crowned us with glory and honour. Crowns, of course, are a symbol of position, honour and status. And humans are exalted with glory and honour because of God's favour upon them. That favour is expressed in our unique relationship with God. We alone in all creation bear the divine image. And of course, he says that God has made us ruler on the earth. He's given us authority over the earth. David's probably thinking of Genesis 1 and 28. For there humans stand uniquely apart from the rest of creation, especially the animals, symbolised in man's authority to name them. And so all of creation, all of the earth has been put under man's feet, giving man a certain power and position and authority. But that is a delegated position of power and authority, for all things have been placed. This is a sign of God's care, that he has placed all of this under our feet. David's question, "What is man?" therefore, is not spoken cynically, but rather is spoken in wonder and awe that God, this majestic, glorious, powerful Creator would care so much for us. And knowing that God cares so much for us that just the thought of us stirs up something in God's heart, that He wants to lavish His care on us, that should give us tremendous encouragement, especially in these days that we're living through. For it means, as St. Paul affirms, that God will not let anything in all creation ever separate us from Him, because He cares so much for us, and because He cares so much for us, we can endure all things, even these days that we're living through. Thanks for listening. God bless.